Staff doesn't enter through the front. The words were sharp, casual, final. The hostess didn't even look up at me when she said it, just tilted her head slightly and pointed toward a narrow hallway hidden behind heavy velvet curtains, where trays clinked, shoes hurried, and people moved quickly without ever being noticed. A few guests nearby heard. Someone let out a short laugh. Not loud, not cruel. Just enough to confirm the decision had already been made. I stood there a second too long, holding my invitation between my fingers, feeling the room do what rooms like this always do. Assess, categorize, and assign a value before you ever speak. To them, I wasn't a guest. I wasn't important. I was the help who had gotten lost. What they didn't know was that the VIP list in her hand had my name printed in bold. What they didn't know was that I had been invited personally, not as decoration, not as charity, not as an obligation. And what they definitely didn't know was what would happen the moment I walked through the other entrance. Because when I entered through the VIP doors, the laughter died, the music faltered, and the entire room went silent in a way that couldn't be rehearsed. But none of them knew I wasn't the same woman they had just humiliated. Before I tell you why my name was on that list, and who was waiting just beyond that door, let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a place and felt judged before you even spoke? Treated like you didn't belong, not because of what you did, but because of how you arrived? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one, and stories like this exist because so many of us have lived them. And if you want to understand how that moment turned into a complete reversal, subscribe and stay with me. This story only gets more uncomfortable from here. 3 months earlier, I learned something brutal about rooms like that. They don't ask who you are. They decide what you are, instantly. That night was a charity reception, invitation only, hosted inside a glass-walled mansion designed to look generous without ever feeling open. Soft piano music floated through the space, the kind chosen to suggest empathy while reinforcing hierarchy. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to deliver documents my supervisor couldn't risk sending digitally. That was my first mistake. I stepped inside wearing a simple black dress, clean, professional, neutral enough, I thought, to blend into the background without raising suspicion. But disappearance only works when people allow it. This room didn't. Eyes moved across me the way customs officers scan passports. Not curious, not hostile, just efficient. Evaluating, sorting, deciding where I fit, if anywhere at all. A woman near the bar paused mid-sentence when she noticed my shoes. Another guest smiled politely, then turned away too quickly, like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. No one asked my name. No one asked why I was there. And then someone decided to correct the mistake. A man with silver hair and inherited confidence stepped directly into my path, blocking it without touching me. His suit was flawless in the way only old money can afford. Pressed, quiet, unquestioned. "You're not supposed to be here," he said calmly. I blinked, unsure if I'd misheard. "Staff uses the side entrance." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. That was what made it worse. I tried to explain. I lifted the envelope, the sealed invitation, the documents inside it. I started to speak. He didn't look at any of it. "This is a VIP event," he said, smiling faintly, the way people do when they believe they're being reasonable. "And you're holding up the flow." A few people nearby noticed. Someone laughed, not loudly, not openly, just enough to register. That laugh did something irreversible. Because in that instant, I understood this wasn't confusion. It was classification. They weren't mistaking me for the help. They had already decided I was the help. And what hurt most wasn't being stopped. It was realizing how natural it felt to them. How automatic, how rehearsed, as if people like me always arrived incorrectly. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't the last time I would walk through that door. I grew up learning how to go places quietly. Bus tickets folded carefully and tucked into the smallest pocket of my bag. Schedules memorized because missing one meant being late, and being late meant being judged before you even arrived. My mother taught me early that movement itself could be a privilege. "Get where you need to go," she used to say. "Don't worry about how it looks." So I didn't. I took buses while others took cars. I waited while others were waved in. I learned how to arrive early, stay invisible, and leave without being remembered. And for a long time, I believed effort would eventually speak louder than appearance. I was wrong. Effort impresses people who had to try. It irritates people who never did. They hear your background before your ideas. They notice what you lack before what you bring. They decide your value long before you ever open your mouth. I learned that lesson young. While other kids talked about summer trips and family connections, I memorized routes. I learned which buses ran late, which stations were safest at night, which shortcuts saved minutes but cost dignity. I didn't complain. Complaints were expensive. I became useful instead. Not loud, not visible, useful. I learned how systems actually worked. Not on stage, not at podiums, but behind closed doors. I watched how decisions were made quietly, how credit traveled upward while labor stayed anonymous. And slowly, without realizing it, I built something most people never notice until it threatens them. I built leverage. What I didn't know then was that someone inside their world had already noticed. Someone who didn't care how I arrived, only that I did. And when they laughed at my bus ticket, they had no idea how close I already was to changing the rules entirely. I didn't meet him at a gala. I didn't meet him in a boardroom or a private club. I met him in a place where no one expected someone like him to be watching. It was an ordinary afternoon. The kind you forget unless it changes everything. I was explaining something technical to someone who clearly didn't understand it, repeating myself slowly, choosing my words carefully, knowing from experience that clarity often gets mistaken for weakness. That's when I felt it. That sensation of being observed, not judged, not dismissed, measured. When I looked up, he wasn't staring. He was listening, really listening. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct me. He didn't rescue the conversation. He waited until I finished, completely finished, before asking a single question. It was precise, sharp, uncomfortable. The kind of question only someone who already understands the game would ask. I answered honestly. No performance, no simplification. He nodded once. That nod wasn't approval. It was recognition. We spoke for less than 10 minutes. No introductions. No titles exchanged. And yet, when he left, I knew something had shifted. Not externally, but internally. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he controlled. But I knew one thing with certainty. For the first time, someone powerful had seen me before deciding what I was worth. Weeks passed. Then months. Doors began opening without explanation. Conversations shifted tone. Requests arrived that felt oddly intentional. People who had never responded suddenly followed up. Still, no name, no headline, just pressure building quietly, like air before a storm. And months later, standing in that mansion, being told to use the side entrance, I finally understood. That man hadn't been observing me casually. He had been measuring. And the man who laughed at me that night had no idea how badly he had miscalculated. What happened next didn't look like revenge. There was no announcement, no dramatic upgrade, no warning shot. Just access. Access that arrived quietly and stayed. Emails answered faster. Meetings that suddenly included me. Questions directed at me instead of around me. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I noticed the pattern. I wasn't being elevated publicly. I was being positioned. Information started reaching me before it reached others. Decisions were being shaped upstream, long before they became visible outcomes. I was asked for opinions that weren't optional. They were expected. And for the first time, I understood something unsettling. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it studies you first. I learned when to speak, when to stay silent, when to let others underestimate me one last time. The invitation arrived without ceremony. Same event, same mansion, same people. But this time the envelope was different. Heavier paper, no generic greeting. My name printed alone, centered, intentional. And one line beneath it. VIP access confirmed. I didn't smile when I read it. I felt calm, because I finally understood the architecture of the room I was about to enter. They believed power always arrived loudly, expensively, predictably. They were wrong. This time I didn't arrive on a bus. And when they saw how I arrived, everything they believed about me collapsed at once. The music didn't stop. That was the first thing I noticed. The orchestra kept playing while the room itself froze, like sound had detached from reality. I didn't arrive through the driveway. I didn't arrive where motion was expected. I appeared at the VIP entrance, the door that only opens when security already knows your name. A guard checked his list, paused, then stepped aside without a word. Another nodded once. No questions, no hesitation. Inside, conversations began to die. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unnaturally, like oxygen being removed from the room. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" Someone else answered too quickly, "I don't know." That was the moment panic entered the room. Because not knowing, in places like that, is dangerous. Eyes moved differently now, not dismissive, calculating. The same people who had sorted me as staff weeks earlier were now watching me like an anomaly they couldn't explain. And then I saw him, the man who had told me to use the side entrance. He was holding a drink he forgot to lift. His smile didn't move. Recognition hit him slowly, and then all at once. Not because of what I was wearing, not because of confidence, because of where I had entered, and who was walking just behind me. But I didn't look at him. I kept walking, because power doesn't pause to explain itself, and silence, in rooms like that, speaks louder than any apology ever could. Whispers moved faster than truth. She came through VIP. That entrance is locked. Who cleared her? People weren't speaking to each other anymore. They were calculating. Eyes followed me with urgency now, not judgment. That subtle shift, from dismissal to assessment, was impossible to miss. A woman near the bar leaned toward her husband, her voice sharp with disbelief. That's not possible. But it was. Security didn't escort me out. They adjusted around me. One guard repositioned himself near the entrance. Another subtly blocked a corridor that led toward me. That's when the room understood something had changed. Smiles appeared, too late. Polite nods followed, rehearsed. People who hadn't looked at me twice before were suddenly remembering my face. Someone said my name incorrectly. Someone else said it like they already knew it. The man who had humiliated me earlier took one step forward, then stopped. He wasn't waiting for permission from security. He was waiting for permission from me, and that terrified him, because power recognizes power instinctively, and he could feel it slipping away. But the room still didn't know why. Not yet, and the not knowing was eating them alive. The host approached. Not confidently, carefully. He didn't raise his voice, didn't clap for attention. He simply spoke my name, clearly, in a tone reserved for people who mattered. He thanked me for coming, then thanked the person I arrived with. That name landed like a dropped glass, not shattered, irreversible. I watched faces change in real time. Some guests recalculated alliances. Others searched the room for exits. A few realized too late what they had participated in earlier. The man who mocked me didn't move. He couldn't, because now he understood something essential. The bus ticket wasn't what defined me. It was what I chose before they noticed. And the reason I was standing there now had nothing to do with luck. It had everything to do with access, timing, and information. Things rooms like this pretend don't matter, until they suddenly do. I felt the weight of attention settle fully now. Not curiosity, expectation. They wanted to know what I would do next. And for the first time, I realized something else. This moment wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure. And facts, unlike appearances, don't bend. He approached me later. Not publicly, not bravely. Quietly. The same man who had blocked my path weeks earlier now stood close enough to lower his voice. His posture was different. Shoulders slightly forward. Hands too still. The confidence that once came so naturally to him now felt rehearsed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, smiling without warmth. He spoke as if we had always been equals, as if the humiliation hadn't happened, as if memory itself could be negotiated. I didn't interrupt. I let him speak long enough to reveal himself. He apologized without apologizing, explained without explaining, laughed nervously at jokes I didn't make. Then I said one sentence. Just one, not emotional, not dramatic. Factual. I watched his expression empty in stages. Confusion first, then calculation, then something colder. Because what I revealed couldn't be dismissed as opinion. Facts don't care who you know. They don't soften for tone. They don't disappear because a room wants them to. By the time he stopped speaking, the damage was already done. People nearby weren't asking who I was anymore. They were asking what he had done. That's when I walked away. Not loudly, not triumphantly. through the same VIP door, and behind me, the room began to rearrange itself around a new truth it could no longer ignore. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I never needed an audience for justice. By the next morning, messages started arriving. Not congratulations, but confirmations. Meetings scheduled without explanation. Doors opened without resistance. Names that once ignored me now waited. But the biggest shift wasn't external. It was internal. I stopped explaining how I arrived. Stopped apologizing for efficiency. For simplicity. For starting with less. The bus ticket had never been a weakness. It had been proof. Proof that I knew how to move through systems without permission. That I understood routes others overlooked. That I could arrive anywhere. With or without applause. The same people who laughed at it were now trying to follow my path. They couldn't, because they had never learned how to move without entitlement. And I no longer needed rooms like that to validate me. They needed me. They treated me like the help. Not because they were confused, but because it made them feel safe. They believed power always arrived the same way, dressed the same way, entered the same door. They thought status was visible before it was proven. That importance announced itself. That authority never came quietly. They were wrong. Power doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it studies the room first. Sometimes it learns the routes no one respects. Sometimes it waits. They laughed at the bus ticket because they thought it defined me. They never stopped to ask where it had taken me. What they mistook for limitation was discipline. What they mocked as simplicity was strategy. What they dismissed as the help was someone who had learned how systems really work, from the inside out. When I walked through the VIP entrance, it wasn't revenge. It was confirmation. Confirmation that worth doesn't ask permission. That respect isn't granted. It's enforced by reality. That silence, when it comes all at once, is never accidental. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I didn't need to. The room understood. And when I left through that same door, the one they believed I didn't deserve, I realized something final and irreversible. Some people spend their entire lives guarding entrances. Others learn every path. And one day, they choose which door to open. If this story stayed with you, it's because you've lived a version of it. Because at some point, someone looked at where you started. Your clothes, your job, your route, your silence, and decided where you belonged. They didn't see your discipline, your intelligence, your patience. They only saw the entrance you used. If this story resonated with you, take a second to like the video. It helps these stories reach people who are still walking quietly, learning, preparing, waiting for the right door. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories where appearances collapse and truth wins, subscribe to the channel. This space is for the underestimated, for the ones who didn't arrive loud, but arrived ready. And before you go, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching from right now? Because sometimes, the most powerful journeys begin in places no one expects. Some people move unnoticed for years, until one day, they don't. And when that day comes, silence does all the talking.